So Jen, um, thank you for meeting with us tonight, and realize that you're revisiting Pensacola.
I'm actually just visiting some friends of my boyfriend's, Jeff. So we're just here for vacation, I guess, for a weekend.
Socializing and tourism.
Kind of, yes.
Okay. And you were last in Pensacola when?
Oh, probably 2 months ago. I drive through here on a pretty regular basis.
Okay. And I understand that you were an observer at the first Kent Hovind trial when he went up for tax charges.
Yes,
Is that correct?
just at the sentencing, not the whole trial.
Okay. What was your involvement with Creation Science Evangelism, with the ministry? Had you been interested in their teachings? Were you involved in homeschooling? Can you give us a little bit of the backstory?
Sure. I was a homeschool mom for 17 years and had, listened to some of Kent Hovind's teachings. And so I brought my kids down here to see Dinosaur Adventureland. And
When you say down here, where did you live?
oh, in San Antonio. So we're from San Antonio, Texas. So we came to see Dinosaur Adventureland, and I met Kent and his son Eric and a bunch of the people that worked here. And Kent spent a good deal of time with us that day, a couple hours or so, and got to know him a little bit. And so that was really what my knowledge of him before the trial.
And did your children enjoy the experience? Did they like him?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, everything about it was really, it was a wonderful day. We had a great time.
And what were some of the interesting things at Dinosaur Adventureland just because they're interesting, and what were some things that might have supported the creationist or young earth creationist argument, so to speak?
I'm not sure that we really saw anything that supported the young earth creationist viewpoint that stood out to me that day. It was more, the science experiments that kind of made things come to life, and just kind of a little bit of adventure in everything that they did. And there weren't very many people, so it was kind of one-on-one with the people who were working here and our family. And so it was more the interaction that stood out to us that day.
How many kids were you homeschooling, and were you homeschooling them at the same time?
Yes, I have 3 kids that I homeschooled almost all the way through. So.
At the time, what church or denomination, et cetera, were you involved with? Around the time?
At that time, I went to Doug Phillips' church in a Bernie Christian Assembly in San Antonio, which Doug Phillips is well known in the homeschool movement.
Got it. And did you often take field trips with your children?
All the time. So we would go traveling around the United States at least once a year and just do various things like that. But just locally we did as much as possible. It was a much better learning experience, I felt, for my children to do those kind of things. Fantastic.
So you attended the sentencing, and help us set the scene a little bit. At his first trial, were there many people observing? Was it a federal courthouse? What judge was presiding? Because I attended the recent trial, as Abigail did, and Ben, who was one of our young journalists based here. We attended the whole trial, and it was very high tech and very kind of fast paced. And there were lots of federal marshals because of the, I think, large part because some of Kent Hovind's supporters are fairly exuberant and easy with their words and their veiled threats, what have you. So what was the scene back in, what year was it?
Well, it must have been 2000, oh goodness, not sure, 2005. Well, that says 2007. 2007 there.
Okay. So you attended the sentencing in 2007, and what was the setting? And were your children with you at that time? Were you using this as a civics lesson?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My 2 youngest children were with me at that time. And, goodness, 2007, maybe they were 12 and 14, years old. And my youngest one kind of has the mind of a 2-year-old, so that was a little bit difficult situation. So she was wearing special hearing protection, so she kind of stood out in the courtroom. But I don't remember the judge's name. I believe it's the same judge who's been going
Rogers.
through. Yeah,
Right.
Rogers. So same
Okay.
one, and it was a federal courthouse then.
And was the courtroom?
It was packed. It was packed. It was just, standing room only.
This time in this trial, it was kind of quiet the first couple days, and by the end of it, it was packed.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say vast majority from out of town. Hovind's ministry was fairly
Mm-hmm.
international
It was.
or regional, so it makes some kind of sense. But you notice the fact that there didn't seem to be a lot of local supporters. And the first trial in 2007, did you have any sense of who was who and where they were from?
There were a lot of local people here. Of course, in his ministry, he employed a lot of local people, and then a lot of his family members. Many of his family members were here as well in the first one. So, I can't say how many in comparison to this one, but there were a lot of local people here.
And in terms of out-of-towners, did you have any sense for how many of you were from out of town?
It didn't seem to be very many. I mean, I didn't take a poll or anything, but I didn't get the sense that there were too many from out of town.
So in some ways, it was a mirror opposite experience.
It seems to be.
And was there heavy security?
No, I don't recall that at all.
Yeah, so it was a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have on your computer screen?
Well, I recently wrote a couple letters to one to Kent and one to Eric, and so I've got some of the exact quotes that were here that are part of the reason why I'm involved in this situation at this point in the game.
Okay, so we got to turn over some of the discourse to you. What's your involvement? And one other thing, I don't know why it's come up so often, but when you read the blogs and social media of the Free Kent Hovind supporters and movement, they often pull this quote. They say that the judge said, or the prosecutor, what Kent Hovind did was worse than a rapist. When you read the transcripts, Eric Hovind, very nice young man who I've talked to many times, he said they're treating my dad like a rapist. So I said, okay, well, that's where the phrase came from, and people kind of just got a little bit twisted. Did you hear Judge Rogers say, or do you remember, Kent Hovind's crime makes him worse than a rapist?
Well, that's actually the difference between me and everyone else who was in the courtroom that day. So even though it was a standing room only courtroom, I was the only one who was taking notes. None of the reporters were taking notes, none of the observers were taking notes. So I took notes, and I have a blog, so I actually wrote in very great detail what happened at the end of each day. And you're like a teacher and a professional, and generally you trust your documentation trail? Absolutely, yeah. And I had conversed with someone who's very intimately acquainted with the case after each part of the trial as well, and just double checked with him to make sure that I had all my facts straight. So, but basically, it's as you have said. So I have a couple of exact quotes here. Just, I think it's important that we have the words correct. Okay. Because as far as I understand, Kent is currently saying that the judge accused him of being worse than a rapist. Not sure whether it's so much him or his supporters, but in any case, that's we can say that he hasn't necessarily denied that. Whether or not he said that or someone else said that and attributed it to, there is, you could spend all your time keeping up with the Hovindicator blogosphere. Right. Fortunately, I have a full-time job and I'm a solo parent, but
many times this thing, well, there were 8 affidavits of people that heard this, so on and so forth. So, they're often referred to the 8 people who were there, signed affidavits, which I've never seen, who swore to this.
Right. And so those 8 affidavits, as far as I'm aware, were all sworn statements that were done 8 to 9 years after the fact, and whereas my documentation was done the day it happened. And so that's what makes mine different than the others that are being.
As a journalist and a filmmaker who has trouble remembering what story he worked on the week before, I would say probably it sounds like we are inclined to believe the accuracy of your documentation.
Well,
So
I'm hoping so, and that's why I'm coming
Right.
forward and speaking out.
Right. Okay. So let's hear what your notes say.
Okay. Well, I just basically I wrote a couple letters, one to Eric and one to Kent. They are similar, but not exactly the same. And, just reminded them of how I met them. They both remembered me. They both wrote back. They both remembered me. And so here is the part that I think is important.
And these letters were written when?
January 28th of this year. So I just pulled out the quote from the transcript here where the judge says, "I received letters from many of you," and at this point she's speaking to everyone who's in the audience, just the people who came to observe like me. "I received letters from many of you expressing the view that sometimes those convicted of heinous crimes are subject to less time than Mr. Hovind is facing in this case. This is a serious case, serious charges, serious conduct. Make no mistake about it. By your conduct in this case, Mr. Hovind, in my opinion, you dishonored the men and the women in our military, you dishonored your fellow Americans, and you've dishonored the Constitution of the United States." And that is the only thing that she said regarding this particular section about a heinous crime. And that was in regard to Kent Hovind's sentencing. And Eric that day had stood up and was a character witness for his father. And then the next day was Joe's sentencing, and Eric again stood up as a character witness for his mother. And when he stood up for Joe Hovind, his mother, he said that he reminded the judge that it had been his honor to speak on his father's behalf at his trial, but that he considered this occasion to speak on behalf of his mother to be 10 times that honor. "Justice has to be blind," Eric stated, as he agreed with the judge sentencing his father to a sentence worse than that of a rapist. He said that this whole trial was really meant for Kent to be made the example of, and that Joe didn't need to be used in that same way. So Kent was the only one who ever used the word rapist, and he...
Sorry, you mean Eric?
I'm sorry, Eric was the only one who ever used the word rapist. The judge did not. She did mention that it was that those convicted of a heinous crime are sometimes subject to less time than Kent Hovind would be. But that's all that she had to say with it. So it was all in conjunction with the sentencing and the time of how much. At no time did anyone in the trial ever call Kent worse than a rapist.
So why did this what's your thought about how these words got twisted around and circulated, and why this affidavit was signed? Do you think it was a genuine misunderstanding that the years had clouded? Do you think folks knew what had been said and this was a rhetorical point which they were using to try to spring their leader?
Well, that's not something that I really know. So, I can't say what was in someone else's mind on what happened here. I don't know. I know that when he saw the transcripts, Kent said that's not what he remembered, and that's when the story started going from there. But I don't know what was in anyone's mind.
So you remember Kent Hovind himself saying that the transcripts were off as opposed to his minions?
He said that in one of his YouTube video things that they do the prison call, to his friend, and then they put it on YouTube.
Rudy Davis and Kent Hovind. Mm-hmm. So what do you recall about what Kent Hovind had said regarding this during that call?
That's when he said that he accused the judge of calling him worse than a rapist. So,
And do you think he misremembered?
I hope so.
So-
But I really don't know. I can't speak to what.
So can we
that-
leave? Can we leave it at that's the kinder interpretation? Okay. Any other insight that you have on the Hovind case and any of your feelings, on what's happened, to the extent that you followed it with the retrial and now his acquittal?
Right. Well, I sent the 2 letters, one to Eric and one to Kent, and they both sent me a letter back. And so Kent sent me a letter back saying that his only goal was for the truth to be known. And so I hope that that is seriously what is happening, and that's really why I'm here today, because my goal is that the truth be known.
Did you hear back from Eric?
Yes, I did. So Eric agreed that nothing had been tampered with in the transcript, and he agreed with my statements of what had happened with the 2 character statements that he had made about both of his parents, and that he was the one who said that the sentencing was worse than that of a rapist, but that the judge had never said that Kent was worse than a rapist. And so he was concerned about the whole situation with what was happening as well.
So are you concerned about the response of some of the more colorful characters in the Free Kent Hovind movement to this this claim that you're making, which is just in line with the court transcripts? And I know court reporters, and I know their level of professionalism.
Right.
And can't imagine, it's just one of these obvious things. But if you're coming out with this, somewhat publicly, do you expect to have some sort of censor from the Free Kent Hovind movement folks, or do you think they're basically, fairly jubilant? All the charges have been dismissed, and as far as we know, Kent Hovind will be a free man on August 9th of 2015, and then serve his probation, and chances are he will be allowed to travel and continue to evangelize on the creation front as long as he has permission from his probation officer. So what do you have any concerns? Are you what would you say to someone who might bring this issue up again?
I don't have any concerns personally for myself, but I understand the legal system and the justice system, and having been involved in it in many different areas, and I know that if other charges come up and there are sworn statements that are brought to court that are found to be false, then those people can really be facing serious charges. So I would just be very, very careful about ever making a sworn statement unless you're 100% sure of what it is. Making a sworn statement, 8 to 9 years later after something has happened is not usually a very wise idea.
So you think there's the conceivable possibility that there's some exposure there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other wisdom or comments on either Kent Hovind, his ministry, or the Free Kent Hovind movement, or the second trial? Anything else you want to share with us?
I don't think so. I hope that that this has been a situation where Kent has grown in his walk with the Lord during his time in prison. I hope it's changed him for the better, as I would hope that of anyone, in that kind of a situation. And I hope that he uses the situation to, whatever goes on, to make wise choices and, and lead, I guess, to do whatever God calls him to do in ministry and in a wise way.
Last question. To the extent that you followed some of the other writings or videos or audio broadcasts of the Free Kent Hovind movement, in researching this one or seeing it get blown up, and having been involved in other, as you say, legal and religious causes and events, do you have any general feelings about the Free Kent Hovind movement and how it was expressed, at least on the internet, and whether that was productive or counterproductive?
I did not follow it really to very much of a great degree at all. At the 10 years ago, I followed everything that was happening, but now, I'm kind of in a different stage in my life. And so I have not followed very much of it at all.
And was your interest 10 years ago because you had a very good experience at Dinosaur Adventureland?
Mm-hmm.
You had a positive impact on your kids?
Mm-hmm. Kent was genuinely likable, and just you could tell that he really took an interest in us, and it wasn't putting on a front or anything, which you get from some ministry people. And he just really genuinely took an interest in us and our family, and so that's what my interest was at that point.
So kindness begets kindness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan.
And enjoy the rest of your Memorial Day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
You too.